called for his citation before we listen to his paper. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, standing before you is Mr. Bisi Oni. He holds a distinguished first degree and also a master's degree in economics from the University of Lagos, the University of First Choice and the nation's pride. He is a council member and an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, associate member of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, both in Nigeria. He is also a fellow of the London-based Leadership for Environment and Development, where he has been involved in developing initiatives in the areas of business and investment sustainability. He has won the Best Graduating Students Award in the professional exams of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers and the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria. Mr. Bisi Oni was a past Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of FBN Securities Limited, the stock brokerage business of the First Bank of Nigeria PLC. Prior to that, he was the head funds asset management of FBN Capital Limited with responsibilities for FBN Heritage Fund and Principal Investment. He is currently an executive director of FundQuest Financial Services. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Bisi Oni. A round of applause for him, please.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. And I want to especially thank the council members and especially the acting president of the Nigerian Institute of Management for this invitation. But before I go ahead, I guess in the intervening period by which I was invited, and now we had an unexpected event, the loss of our president. And before I proceed, I want just to observe a 1-minute silence in his honor. May his soul rest in perfect peace. You may be seated. Thank you very much. I want to stand on the existing protocol, but I cannot do that without acknowledging the eminent personality in the house. I saw my Prof, while in school, Professor Inyonda. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so very much. And I've also had the privilege of learning and working with other beautiful minds who are currently here with me at this presentation. I have my colleagues from FundQuest Financial Services seated at that part of the hall. Please, can you stand up for recognition? Thank you so much for coming. Those are my colleagues. Please, can we give them a round of applause? Thank you so very much. My job today is very simple as the lead speaker in this annual National Management Conference, is to give direction to what we should be debating and discussing for the remaining part of today. And part of that is to set the context and the tone for other speakers later in the day. And as the lead speaker, the theme that we'll be looking at is to examine the public policy management as it affects entrepreneurship. You will be walking you through a few slides, and then we commence the conversations around that. I will run through the slides fairly quickly and see whether we can engender conversations around some of the issues that I've been raising at this conference. My joy at the end of the day, by the time you are rounding up this conference, will be that there will be tangible and practicable solutions that will come out of this conference that we can implement and bring about a jump-starting of that critical sector called entrepreneurship in Nigeria. So I'll be walking you through a 6-item content. We look at understanding the basic public policy process. That's setting the tone. The case for entrepreneurship development. We'll also be considering the public policy entrepreneurship nexus. What are the expectations? And when we are done with the expectation, we'll be looking at the reality, trying to situate expectation with reality check. And then we'll look at the public policy management as a panacea for entrepreneurship development in this part of the world. And then I will give you my thoughts. Starting from the beginning, it's necessary to set what I call the concept. In defining the concept, what is public policy? And as managers of people and resources, I take it for granted that we know that public policy essentially represents a set of rules, guidelines, and laws that are put together with an objective in mind. It is called public policy for a purpose, for the betterment of the public, though not made by the public. So essentially, a set of laws, guidelines, actions that are taken by government in order to work in favor of the public. It's as simple as that. And if it's as simple as that, you may then ask, why is it that we seem not to have had a positive traction in our public policy management process in Nigeria? We'll get to that in a short while. But let's look at the key attributes of public policy, especially in the parts of the world. It plays an important role. Public policy is essentially an instrument of rejigging society towards a desired objective. Public policy is an instrument by which you seek to correct certain malaise in the society or in the public space. And it is called public policy essentially because of where it is targeted to achieving an objective. And when we apply such to the core area we are talking about today, and which is entrepreneurship development, it simply means therefore the cocktail of policies, cocktail of laws, those guidelines that are put together by the public sector or by government towards achieving or jump-starting the entrepreneurship sector in Nigeria. And that is the key nexus that we need to understand as we progress in this presentation. It is necessary for us to have that common understanding such that those policies, those public policies are geared towards developing and deepening the entrepreneurship development in this part of the world. And like I said earlier, public policy is exactly what it is, public and not government. So in terms of focus, the policies, the guidelines, the laws are not to benefit those in government. And I take that again. The public policy instrument or a tool is not out to benefit those in government. The objective, the focus of public policy, primarily speaking, is towards the public. Although made by the government, for it is for the common good of the public. And that's why lead managers come into play, especially our role as an institute of repute, that it is from people like you that the nation is waiting to hear the direction of public policy. And since we have chosen entrepreneurship development this year, it simply means, therefore, that there must be a cocktail of issues, policies, guidelines, and pronouncements that will be geared towards developing this critical area of the nation. Let's walk through the broad classification of public policy. One, regulatory. For those of our colleagues that work in the financial services, when we talk about regulation as an instrument of development, we understand that better. And in that space, in the financial services, we have the Central Bank of Nigeria. And the bank, that's Central Bank now, has played that role very, very significantly. But in terms of appraisers, it depends on the side of the divide that you belong to, whether that has been done to create what needed to be seen within that space or not. The second public policy, in terms of broad classification, is distributive. And that speaks to how products and services moves from the producing end to the consumer end. What are those landmines that public policy perhaps may have put in place, or what are those goodwills that public policies have put in place to making sure that goods and services are delivered at the best price to where they are desired in the economy. The third part of the broad classification is redistributive, and this is one of the attributes of restructuring or redistributing wealth in a society, and the fiscal policies especially that are used within this space, unlike central bank that superintends the monetary policy. In this case, the redistributive talks about the fiscal policies and how it creates or restructure wealth in the society. Of course, a common example is the subsidy policy, the fuel subsidy policy, the COVID-19 intervention policies, all that we all witness. And like I said earlier, whether it's successful or not is a question that we need to debate here. And that's one of the key things for us. We need to take a policy or these policies and situate them within the context of the benefits of the society and whether they met the stated objective or not. Others include extractive, and that speaks more to situations maybe in the oil and gas sector, and symbolic. This speaks more to recognition, like what our president did last week, when he decided to give certain honors to some of our best athletes that we've seen for a very, very long time. The next is to look at the process of public policies before we get into the meat of the presentation. What are the process? Just like you solve problems in the private sector, just as you solve problem in the company that you currently manages, is the same process that we follow in situating or implementing public policy. One of the things you do in trying to put in place public policy is problem identification. For those of us that function in strategy, you know that before you can solve any problem, it's necessary to fully come to space with the problem identification and understanding that problem. For instance, you seek to grow the market share of your company. And one of the key things you need to know is what is the size of that market and what are you doing? Why are you not getting more than the current percentage share, market share that you're currently getting? Then when you understand when you identify the problem, then you can come up with formulating the policies. Policy formulation is the how to correcting the problem that you've identified. And the third is in the adoption. If you're talking about a corporate, for instance, you're talking about the buy-in of everyone. If you're talking about a country, in this context that we are discussing, we are talking about ensuring that every organs of government and every key stakeholders that will be affected by that policy are carried along. And those owners of the policy, now talking about either the ministry or the department of government or the corporations of government, they know what is expected of them per time in response to whatever that policy may present upon implementation. And then from adoption, we get to implementation, and that is taking the policy right to the field and seeing, getting the feedback. Feedback leads us to evaluation. This policy is not achieving the type of objective or the type of goals that we have thought it will achieve. Then you can retweak it again and come back to policy problem identification, and the process goes on like that. And in terms of its management like that, now you know that it is an interaction. PPM, or public policy management, is essentially an interaction between the governed and the government. It means, therefore, that the government comes up with policy, but that interaction, the formulation of that policy, the identification of that problem may not necessarily be coming from the government. It could be a pressure group. It could be a stakeholder. I mean, like we have here, we are all critical stakeholder in the nation called Nigeria. So in this type of forum that we are in, we need to come up with a type of influencing policy or jump-starting conversations around a particular policy that could lead into entrepreneurship development in Nigeria. So when we are talking about PPM or public policy management, it simply speaks to ability of the private sector or the public being able to come up with papers or come up with a form of recommendation to government that will make government develop policies around that. Let's look at the case. Why public policy? Why? And why should it be towards entrepreneurship development? Why did we seek to look at this area in the first instance? One of the key things I'm sure on your slide you've seen is the fact that if you look at, even in our environment, whether you operate from here, anywhere you operate from in Nigeria, the number of retail businesses, what we call SME or micro businesses in Nigeria, the number, according to Bureau of Statistics, is about 90 to 95%, depending on the year that you're looking at. And the question, therefore, is, in terms of numbers, 1, 2, 3, in terms of number, we have more of MSMEs than the structured organizations, the large organizations in Nigeria, the company you call the FMCGs or the major banks. But there are institutions, they are not past more than 5, more than 10, more than 15, or 20 at best, and there are a whole lot of them in employment, contributing to the gross domestic product in Nigeria, and also helping government attain that its own objective. And this is one of the key pillars of the need for PPM as a major tool to creating, to facilitating, and to encouraging entrepreneurship in Nigeria. For everyone seated here, and those that are being streamed online, if any, it behoves on us, therefore, if we believe and we know that entrepreneurship represented by the medium and small scale businesses is the way to go, it contributes to employment. According to the Bureau of Statistics, it says it's about 90% globally and 50% globally and about 90% here in Nigeria. And contribution to national income is about 40%, while according to World Bank figure, 600 million jobs will be needed by year 2030 globally. 600 million new jobs will be needed to stave off gross unemployment in all the phases of the world. Now the question therefore is, if entrepreneurship measured by SMEs or the roadside mechanic, roadside organizers, roadside restaurants, and all those small businesses. If they employ such a huge number, if they contribute so high to that sector, to the gross domestic product of Nigeria, how come the major instrument of correcting, of allocating resources is not geared towards that sector? I guess that is the key underpinning of our conversations today. Why is PPM necessary for entrepreneurship development? If you look at the next slide, which essentially gives us a rundown of the tables, looking at comparing economies, various economies in the world, and the contributions of SMEs to employment, to GDP, and to business. In Nigeria, like I said earlier, it's about 96. That's as a percentage of the total business entity in Nigeria, and contributing about 46.5%. Let's pause there for a moment. You and I do know that in this part of the world, outside government, if we take out this 46%, 46.5%, the next largest employer of labor in Nigeria is government. So if government is contributing, say, about 30 to 40%, and SMEs contribute about 46%, that means the large organizations, both in the telcos, the financial services, the oil and gas, contribute maybe 10, 15% at best, including agric. So the question, therefore, is, if we have a critical sector called SMEs or micro and small-scale businesses contributing about 46%, why should we not be mindful of pushing more resources or influencing government to creating more policies that will be suitable, that will be positive towards this segment, such that we can enhance the employment, we can grow our gross domestic product, and we can also enhance national income. Next, why should we allow, or should we form a critical voice? Why should we become a critical voice for PPM to be pro-entrepreneurship? This slide just simply gives us what the current situation of things in Nigeria. Currently, the Ministry Index, measured as the summation of the inflation and unemployment rate in Nigeria, is currently about 53.8%. You can say 54%. What does that mean? It simply means that the level of poverty in Nigeria per every one individual is about 54% on the average. So it means these are the various variables, those boxes you see around, two of them, both in unemployment rate and inflation rate, the worsening exchange rate, rising insecurity, each fiscal deficit, high expenditure profile from government, weak revenue base. They are derivatives of all these that we are seeing. These are the things that jumpstart the mystery index. You're talking about insecurity. A few weeks back, I was in a major fruit market in Lagos. And for the first time, the type of, the cost of basic items, I'm talking about agri products now, you're talking about watermelon, you're talking about, say, oranges, pineapples, all those things that we seemingly take for granted in those days. Now, so I asked the woman, why is one watermelon going for 2,333? I actually bought 3 for 7,000. And the woman said, we have to pay a ransom to some people. I don't know what nomenclature you choose to call them, whether you call them bandits or you call them terrorists or whatever nomenclature. But that we have to pay some people to enter into the farm. That once we pay them, we go in and out of farm unhindered. And therefore, we also need to recoup those type of costs and then be able to make decent profit. That's all about insecurity. Worsening exchange rate, we've seen this slide it depends on where you start calculating from. The exchange rate currently, depending on the market you are looking at, whether the import-export window, whether it's the plain black market rate, whether it's the official rate, whether it's the rate for students and those that go on pilgrimage, those rates are not what we used to know. What we've planned for those of us that are in those positions that will take forward-looking decisions. That we say, okay, by this year, we are going to do this. We're going to open another office. We're going to open another line of production. But those rates have thrown all our projections overboard. Why should we be talking about entrepreneurship? There's a quick lesson, kind of a short case study I picked it from Franklin Technology Partners. They started as an institute that seeks to commercialize research findings. An institute that they started out as, okay, you got the research, maybe about how to improve a process or how to improve a particular sector of the economy, then they put funding around it. And this can also be part of the recommendations when we put together a communique at the end of the day to begin to engage the learning institutions on the need to come up with their research findings. How do we commercialize those research findings? And for this company, BFTP is a US-based firm, launched in 1983, set out to commercialize research findings by giving them grants. And as of today, the impact is what really spoke extensively to me when I was making quick research on this. In 2017, 4 years after they were set up, they were able to create 1,900 jobs, new jobs, and new companies, 189 new companies were formed according to the statistics available. So the question therefore is, only for employment and the number of enterprises that came to be as a result of this intervention, it could start changing the narratives of the national economy. Next, we would like us to look at the expectations. What are the expectations? The expectations. The public policy and entrepreneurship nexus. What are these expectations? For that woman by the roadside, or that man that's trying to make an income by either driving those small taxis you've seen. I'm sure you must have seen a couple of them here in Ibadan. And perhaps that woman that is frying something by the roadside, what are those things? What are the public policies that could be put in place that will help our business? If you go out there and interview them, and you ask them, what do you think government should do for you? They are basic, they are normal, they are usual expectations. Nothing esoteric, nothing out of this world. Basic, normal, usual expectations. Let's walk through some of these expectations. Number one, monetary policies. This woman doesn't need 1 million naira. She doesn't need 500,000 naira perhaps. She needs 10,000 naira, and that she can, out of this, she will go to the market, buy beans, fry the beans, buy oil, and then do that every day, and she begins to pay up. But where? For those that have access, the type of interest rate they are exposed to in this market is outrageous. And someone asked me, because, as a lender myself, why should we have double-digit interest rate? One of the key variables that the market price into Nigeria's interest rate structure or regime is the fact that of the probability of loan loss. Because most of the people around here, we could just disappear. It is so easy here in this part of the world to access a facility or a loan and just disappear. That brings us back to a policy that should identify everyone, that should make me identifiable, unable to run away, unable to disappear upon having access to credit. And once that could be done, I know that even if I have a SIM card, unlike before, that you just buy a SIM card and then you throw it away, you buy another one, then you have forgotten, you change your address, and that is it. It's getting better, but we're not yet there. It shouldn't take eternity. The woman outside there doesn't need 1 million. She doesn't need 100 million. Just something basic to keep her running. Guess what? From a research that we did in our company, we found out that people in the rural areas, when they form collective or what you call cooperative, they tend to be more honorable, in quote, about honoring their obligations. All they're looking for, they're not looking for that trendy cars, they're not looking for that high phone, they're not looking for that Giorgio Armani type of suit. They're looking for to sending their children to that school, to feeding those children every day. That's what they're looking for. And they need access, not more than 10,000 naira, not more than 5,000 naira, to be able to put those things together and they can send their children to school. Monetary policy. There must be conversations around intervention policies to bring it down to affecting interest rates and the cost of borrowing in Nigeria. Cost of borrowing is one thing, access is another thing. I've worked for about 30-something years post-graduation, and when I was leaving First Bank Group after about 15 years serving in their investment banking space. That was 2012. And we set up FundQuest Financial Services with a few other colleagues. And I walk up to First Bank branch, and I want to listen to this very carefully, because we're talking about access to credit. I walk up to First Bank, I needed to change my car. Instead of keep paying mechanic almost every week, let me get something fairly new so that I can run this new business. I got to First Bank, they said, no, we can't give you facility. This is a company that I served for about 15 years in various companies. I rose to become the managing director of one of the subsidiaries. I said, why? And the lady said to me, your company is not profiled in our system. The name of your company that you just set up is not profiled in our system. True life story. Now, I've served in the company. I know almost everyone, up to the managing director. And here I am, at the branch level, someone says, you can't access credit. How much more? Someone that you don't even know the way to the branch of a bank. Access to credit is another key area that entrepreneurs have found almost impossible. I'll tell you another story. 2014, when we started FundQuest Financial Services, we met a gentleman who accessed the credit from the company. Fairly elderly, about 63 years at that time. And he wanted to access the credit. He talked to banks, they weren't listening to him. And someone said, go and talk to Bisi. And he came, we did that transaction. He pledged his gratuity as a collateral. His gratuity as a collateral. And when he finally paid his service, he wanted to supply Total then some items, and we funded him. Now, when he paid, we didn't have to resort to his gratuity. The question, therefore, is, how many in this hall have had that type of nasty experience? You've approached a bank or a lending institution, and the answer is no. And you know you have a legitimate business in your hand. This hurts national economy, it hurts families in the long run, and it hurts individuals. Operational policies. How long does it take to register a business in Nigeria? Your guess is as good as mine. Post-COVID, it's almost impossible. Because they will tell you now, you just go online, but hey, what does it take? Before 5 o'clock today, if you want to register a company in Malaysia or Singapore, you don't need to travel there. You need nothing there. You can get a foreign office to give you a registration document, a phone number, an address, and that's all you need. Yet you are in Nigeria, it's taking eternity to get the business registered. And you think entrepreneurs will grow? That becomes the wishful thinking. But this is an expectation. Tax policies. Oh, that is another thing. My wife runs a confectionery business. She wanted to pay her tax, and she asked me, so how do I determine how much I'm going to pay? So I had to call someone that works in Lagos Inland Revenue, do this. Before the time of assessment and payment, in fact, she was asked to pay a series of taxes, about 4 or 5 of them, and that took about 5 to 6 weeks. Now the question is it impossible, is it so difficult that we cannot develop a platform and make sure you pay that, you can self-assess on your tax, and then have that conversation and pay? What of regulatory? In terms of expectation, what are our expectations? The policies may affect how we get licenses and permits. You are by the roadside, local government should be able to issue those permits and licenses to you on the spot and verifiable. What of incubation, gestation period? We entrepreneurs, we desire some measure of cushioning. Not saying it's free, but a take-off incubation grant or a form of support when entrepreneurs do what they know best, growing the business. When you take them out of their primary area, then they begin to struggle. When you ask an entrepreneur, you need X, Y, Z to be able to do this. All that he or she knows is, I want to buy this, I want to mix this, I know what to do, then I want to push it to the market. And they know the market, the product must get to the market at a particular time. But there are humongous and very big obstacles on the way. Market guarantee mechanism, most of our farmers have wastages. You need to take an intentional decision to visit certain markets in Nigeria, and you will see the level of waste, especially in the urban centers. Instead, the most important, the biggest, I think, in Lagos is my 12 market. The level of waste. And they pay them to cut those waste to go and dump them at the dump site. We could do something, there could be policy pronouncement around that. Government buy those things, all of them, farmers will have more, and the retailers also will have decent pricing. This is possible, and it's been done in other jurisdictions. How does negative public policy hinders entrepreneurship development? A quick take on a country called Uruguay. In a particular year, 2003, entrepreneurs were required to deposit over 200% of the capital required to start a business. It's like asking finance institutions in Nigeria to deposit 10x of what they are expected to put in place. Payment of tax was also made cumbersome, and it takes about 304 hours to complete payment of tax each year. Of course, you know what that will do to entrepreneurs. Instead of spending time to grow their business, they are spending more time to satisfy government permit and all that. Now, let's look at the correlation. Given what we've said between public policy and entrepreneurship, it goes without saying that there must be a positive correlation between public policy and the ease of doing business. And ease of doing business in Nigeria, from going through the program, I saw that a speaker will be speaking to that, but extensively later in the day. But suffice to say that the ease of doing business from the last ranking, I think Nigeria ranked about 136 in the whole world, and a bit of improvement from about 141 prior to that time. But one thing is critical here. Not until we break the bottlenecks, not until we democratize the process of registering businesses, of accessing credit, of facilitating tax payment, and making sure that interest rates become bearable to entrepreneurs, chances are that we may not be having positive correlation between entrepreneurship and the ease of doing business in Nigeria. Looking at the data of ease of doing business, 20 worst economies on Transparency International, there are certain things that sit certain economies together when you're talking about ease of doing business. The TI, that's Transparency International, Corruption Perception Index, states that the level of corruption in any economy is proportionally related to the level of ranking of at the ease of doing business of a country. Let me put that in another way. The higher the corruption perception index in any economy, the likelihood the index on the ease of doing business. The question that I have here is, I was having a conversation with my colleague, and I said, why is it that it's not that we cannot buy tickets? Thank you. Why is it that we cannot buy rail tickets online? Why do I have to go from my house in Lagos to Ido, for instance, to go and queue? Why can't I even buy with a card when I even if I have to travel to that place? Why must I buy with cash? Why do I have to appear there? Why do we like building roadblocks instead of expressways? Why do we like making sure that we interface with humans to do business instead of machines? The world has moved away from interfacing with humans to getting things done. Let me skip and go right to the reality that we have. I've been told I have about 10 minutes more. No, let me run you through the reality. What does Nigerian Budget tell you? You can maybe take a look at the paper much more after now. If you look at the budget, the federal government approved budget for 2022, you don't need to be a soothsayer to know that it is skewed against the entrepreneurs in Nigeria. And I give you a quick breakdown. The total recurring expenditure, the total revenue at 10.7, total expenditure at 17.1. That's a budget deficit of about 7 trillion. And how do you want to fund that deficit? If you look at the expenditure profile, debt service, non-recurrent expenditure got the substantial part of it. And allocation to critical sectors, security 2.5 trillion, infrastructure 1 trillion, health 0.8 trillion, and mines and all that. There is nothing substantial allocated to jump-starting these critical sectors. And in the next slide in there, what does Nigerian budget tells us? Pro-poor or pro-elite? These are not my figures. These are CBN's figures that are put out there after it has been approved by the National Assembly. And the question I ask here is the budget designed for the masses or for the elite? I leave that question to you to answer. According to Adam Smith, in his Wealth of Nations, that popular book, he says, everything takes shape towards realizing the objective of economic development in any country that has right institution. The emphasis for me is right institution. It's not all about institutions, it's about right institutions. What are those institutions meant to do? Entrepreneurship, just like anything good, does not occur in a vacuum. There must be institutional framework to drive it, political, legal, social, cultural, and people as well. Excessive taxation, regulation, inconsistent monetary fiscal policies will only retard or at best create a bottleneck to the growth of entrepreneurship and overall economic development in any nation. Let's look at challenges facing entrepreneurship in Nigeria fairly quickly. One, these are open secret. We know this. Anyone can walk us through this. Infrastructure, interest, lack of access to credit, multiple taxation, policy inconsistency, unstable political environment, and so on and so forth. But there is a particular case I want to draw your attention to. is on the bike hailing service. Is slide number 37 on the slide. The story goes this. Gokada, as the name of that company is, raised $5.3 million funding, sometimes in May 2019. In the same year, another company called Max NG raised $7 million funding. Another company raised further funding. Now, all these companies were operating. Government did not go on vacation. And they were operating. They set up structures, they got permit perhaps, they got approvals perhaps, they got licenses obviously, and they started operating. And suddenly, somewhere, somehow, government woke up and said, no more to motorcycles. All funding, don't forget they've raised funding. Cumulatively, these companies have raised close to $200 million. So what happens to such an environment? Now, one key thing, when we're talking about public policy management, it could be peaceful, it could be violent. How do I mean? PPM can be, maybe after now, we come up with a communique and we seek to engage with the decision makers. We seek to have meetings, whether with the House of Rep, relevant houses, or the Senate, and then we put forward our communique and our findings. And we follow up as a pressure group, perhaps. Now, that is peaceful. Like a pressure group, we continue to follow up, maybe research publication, lobbying, public hearing, or Main Street media. Part of our finding, we put it in continuously in the national space in there. But there is another one, protest. Protest. Part of that is what gave birth to the NSAS misadventure, depending on where you belong, whether you are for or against. So the NSAS episode was a wake-up call. It was a form of a reaction to a form of public policy management, to give a feedback to government, the originator of public policy, that hey, we need this to be done. And if that is not done, it becomes a violent cycle of violence. A violent cycle of violence. And thank God that was nipped in the bud, but guess what? There were certain policies that came as a result. NSAS was disbanded, no more roadblocks, I don't know whether it has returned. Recruitment of additional policemen, and at least 26 out of 36 states of Nigeria set up a panel of inquiries. And more importantly for me is the engagement in the current political conversations that we're having of the need for youth. In those days, when you see a youth with a backpack, he's a Yahoo person. These days, they are becoming the voice in the current political conversations. They are becoming a voice. Instead of our youth jackpying, we are now having them. They are still living in droves. But now we are intentionally telling them that you want tomorrow. In those days, they don't matter. But now we know they matter. Because there has been an episode, a violent public policy management tool, and it spoke truth to power. And the right way, how do you influence? How do you manage public policy? How do you manage that? Number one, I have certain recommendations here. I will just be leaving it with you. Do a proper research. I mean, we are a very gifted institute. I'm proud to say that I can be associated with Nigerian Institute of Management. And research is one key tool that will help us leapfrog our influence in this environment. Research, and more research. And as we do that, especially in this policy subject area, and then we can engage the policy owners. My recommendations. Number one, eliminate barriers to entry. That by simplifying access, how do you register, permit, and licenses. Decentralize access to credit, engage regularly with entrepreneurs and innovators. Most of these youth are creative, inclined. They know what to do part-time. Their own economy is different from their father's economy. Therefore, you cannot benchmark them. You cannot score them on with the same score sheet that used to score their father. Policy, pronouncement, and management must change. The approach must change. If what we have been doing before is to engage in the corner, now we need to speak up in the public space like this. To say that those policies are no longer serving us. They're not serving our children, they're not serving our economy, they're not serving our family. Therefore, an approach, a change must happen. And that's the conversations we're having here. And from today, my recommendation to this August gathering will be, let's have a conversation around certain areas that we seek to influence, identify policy disconnect, either intra-agency, contradictory policy, fiscal policies, or other inter-agency policy inconsistencies, form an advocacy group, simplify registrations of SME in Nigeria, and abolish multiple taxation. Herein is my final thought. I said, Nigeria is not short of policies. Policy exists in almost every area of our national life. Sadly, policy itself does not lead to growth. Growth, especially those underpinned by vibrant entrepreneurship, is built on coordinated, consistent, and implemented policy actions. For now, what we have in most sectors of the economy is a major policy disconnect, and not until there is a congruence between policies that's talking about monetary policy, fiscal policy, exchange and trade. The dream of having active entrepreneurship base will be what it is, a dream and nothing more. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your real good.